It's time for Positively Kansas. Coming up, aircraft manufacturing has long been Wichita's bread and butter industry. History tells us that ups and downs are inevitable. So, in challenging times, we offer some encouraging perspective that indicates the local economy is likely to soar once again. Also, you'll have to pay for a haircut or tattoo at this shop in Hutchinson, but the life lessons are free, and the teachers know from experience what they're talking about. It's a story of repentance and second chances. Plus, we'll meet the Kansas artist who once worked for the CIA. Her work is sure to inspire and entertain. And in our Kansas Wild Edge report, Blair shows us how he tackles one of his most challenging assignments. You'll see why capturing amazing images of ducks in flight takes a lot of skill, know-how, and the right equipment. I'm Sierra Scott. Those stories and more are queued up and ready to roll on this edition of Positively Kansas.
Positively Kansas is brought to you in part by...
Before investing your hard-earned money, make sure your financial advisor understands your objectives. Mark Douglas, CFP, serving our community for over 20 years, providing customized financial solutions that focus on the individual.
Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas serves more than 930,000 Kansans in various programs. Independent, member-owned. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas, an independent licensee of Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, supports KPTS.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
Whether you work in the aviation industry or not, it's the engine that drives the South Central Kansas economy. And Wichita's aviation industry got slammed by the COVID-19 pandemic. But there is reason for optimism. Chris Frank offers some encouraging historical perspective.
Wichita's aircraft industry is known for its up and down production cycles.
The aviation industry, especially in Wichita, has been very cyclical since the beginning of it. It has had ups and it has had downs.
The COVID-19 pandemic is just the latest of numerous onslaughts Wichita's aviation industry has had to endure. Spirit Aerosystems already had 2,800 layoffs due to Boeing's suspension of the 737 MAX production. Then Textron Aviation initiated 7,000 employee furloughs as most production is shut down. And Bombardier Learjet also had some furloughs due to the virus.
Frankly, I think in a worse situation than we've ever been in. I think this is worse than the Great Depression.
Production line manufacturing of airplanes in Wichita began just over a century ago. There were said to be more than 30 airplane startup companies in Wichita from 1919 through the 1920s decade. Most didn't survive. E.M. Matty Laird brought his airplane design from Chicago to Wichita with the financial backing of Jake Molendeck and Billy Burke. What started as E.M. Laird Aviation later became Swallow Aircraft Company. Their Swallow aircraft first flew April 8, 1920. In 1925, Travel Air got started with the leadership team of Walter Ennis Jr., Clyde Cessna, Walter Beach, and Lloyd Stearman. Travel Air built 300 to 400 planes a year, peaking in 1929. Their success led to Wichita being labeled the air capital of the world. Both Clyde Cessna and Lloyd Stearman left Travel Air to each form their own airplane manufacturing companies in Wichita in 1927. Now, the Great Depression brought a temporary halt to Wichita's airplane production. Massive layoffs resulted from plant closures.
So what happened then was, you couldn't sell the airplanes. You couldn't sell them for half price.
Phillips says Cessna Aircraft had trouble selling planes marked down as much as 75% of their list prices.
Anything to get money out of it, huge losses. And of course, eventually, it cost Mr. Cessna his job.
Cessna's Wichita plant closed. Clyde Cessna went back to farming. Walter and Ollie Van Beach formed Beach Aircraft and with chief engineer Ted Wells built their Staggerwing plane during the Depression. But Beach struggled.
He didn't sell an airplane for 2 years.
The Stearman plant survived because it had been acquired by United Aircraft and Transportation Company, which also owned Boeing.
However, Stearman had a savior, and that was the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation, who owned Boeing, and by that time had absorbed Stearman, and they kept Stearman alive with small subcontracts for the Boeing 247 airliner.
Stearman later became Boeing's Wichita division, which employed tens of thousands of Kansans over a 7-decade period. The Depression suspended startups like Mooney Aircraft in Wichita. Al Mooney later returned after the war, then left Wichita in the 1950s for Texas.
That started a kind of a cycle of cycles. The downturn of the Depression continued into the 30s and would have continued further but for the Second World War.
Now talk about an upcycle. The Second World War resulted in the greatest ramp up of airplane production Wichita has ever seen. Local plane makers suddenly were awash with military plane orders. Boeing, Beech, Cessna went on hiring sprees and drew in thousands of people to work in the plants from across the country. Wichita was thriving, but that level of production ended with the war concluding.
Just as suddenly, almost as it came up, maybe more so, it ended. The reality is that in plants in Wichita, B-29s being built in Wichita were stopped right where they were. The interruption wasn't just an interruption, it was an abrupt ceasing of activity.
The post-war years had Wichita plants struggling for work to keep employees on the job. Beechcraft built houses and even considered car production. Later, Boeing started rehiring for B-47 and B-52 production. Boeing Wichita thrived until those military contracts ended.
The combination of losing government contracts, B-52 was over, KC-135 was over, the main production of those was over, and then a downturn in commercial, all happening at the same time. And I think 1971 was probably the bottom.
Those roller coaster, up and down, hiring then firing rides had some Wichitans not wanting to work in aircraft production.
I didn't want to work for someone where the fear of layoff was so strong.
Most aircraft workers know layoffs are always a possibility in this industry.
And I've learned that companies have to do that to stay viable, to stay healthy, so that in good times they can produce and do well.
In the post-war years, Cessna and Beech expanded, building single and twin-engine airplanes for personal and business flying.
We were building 6,000, 7,000 airplanes a year.
The decade of the 70s was another high water mark for Wichita plane production.
The industry in 1977 and 1978 delivered over 18,000 airplanes each of those years, and Cessna delivered 56% of it.
Myers says Cessna was building 32 to 33 airplanes a day in those years.
Those were buoyant, fun days.
But like a plane entering a downdraft, so the industry once again entered a turbulent period, resulting in thousands of layoffs.
We had 12,000 employees in 1981. We had 3 in 1986.
Those up and down cycles continued right into the 21st century.
The tech bubble was the first big bust that we saw an impact of people stop buying airplanes, but it didn't last long.
Then the 9/11 attacks brought on another aviation downturn. A deeper downturn occurred during the 2008-2009 recession.
2008 was staggering. I mean, that was a recession that when it hit, people had airplanes on orders with significant amounts of money on deposit, and they just walked away. I mean, left literally millions of dollars of non-refundable deposits. That's how bad and how deep it went.
It took several years for a partial recovery to be seen in general aviation. If it hadn't been for commercial aviation ramping up, allowing Spirit Aerosystems to increase business, Wichita's aviation sector would have been suffering even more so.
It was devastating.
Which leads back to the current industry air pocket from the COVID-19 pandemic.
I think the fallout and the result of the pandemic on the industry here in Wichita, especially the aviation companies, will be unique, something different than what we've seen in the past.
How different remains to be seen. Spirit Aerosystems resumed its Boeing work once Boeing resumed production, but that work landscape isn't stable. Boeing announced in April of 2020 layoffs of 10% due to production cuts of its jetliners. Those cuts have a direct impact on Spirit Aerosystems and other local suppliers. Questions remain how quickly people will return to flying commercially. Airlines parked their underused planes to concentrate on just surviving. That's because airlines have seen a 95% drop in business in the U.S. compared to the same time in 2019. Boeing CEO David Calhoun says it will take years for airline travel to return to 2019 levels. And will companies give up on personal contact with customers, which involves air travel, and instead meet online?
It's at a point now where the pandemic is teaching us some things. Will it have an impact on business and general aviation? Oh, I think it will.
The answers to these questions and more will determine how quickly Wichita's aviation industry bounces back from the latest downturn and how differently it will look. For Positively Kansas, this is Chris Frank.
Chris recently produced a nearly 2-hour-long documentary about the history of Wichita aviation. If you'd like to get a DVD copy of Wichita, the Air Capital, you just need to make a pledge of support to KPTS so we can keep producing in-depth, labor-intensive programs like this one. Find out how by going to kpts.org and clicking on the link that says Wichita, the Air Capital. Or you can make a phone call to KPTS and we'll take care of it that way. Finding work for the thousands of inmates released from Kansas prisons each year isn't easy. Even if they've learned their lesson and are ready to turn over a new leaf, being accepted back into society can be a big challenge. That's why this story is so special. Jim Grayway reports from Hutchinson.
We all know that life in the big house is no picnic.
Prison was very, very scary. It was crazy.
But then again, Luis Gutierrez admits he was no Girl Scout either.
I had a fight with a friend, and I ended up killing my friend.
A jury sent him up the river for life. The place, Hutchinson Correctional Facility. The charge, murder one.
I thought I was going to die in there.
But Luis didn't give up. He took full responsibility and cleaned up his act. The parole board eventually took notice and granted his release after 26 years behind bars. That was then. This is now.
I really, really appreciate you letting me do this for you, man.
He's tattooing and teaching lessons he learned the hard way at his new business called Redemption Inc.
I was blessed with a second opportunity in life, and I didn't come out here with the mentality that you owe me or because I've been away. I came out here with the mentality that I messed up, and it is my duty, it's my responsibility to prove myself to everyone.
The tattoo biz is located inside Legends Barbershop on Hutchinson's north side.
Sad that you're going to a funeral.
The head honcho is ex-con Tommy Galindo.
Prior to becoming the barber, I was off in the streets and I was doing a lot of bad.
Tommy says he initially became a barber because it seemed like a good way to launder drug money. Turns out, it wasn't such a good idea after all.
Went to prison, and I went away for 7 years.
Then, Tommy had a come-to-Jesus moment while perfecting his haircutting skills on cellmates.
I really do feel like God was like, man, you are talented, son, but I am gonna put you away for 7 years. So if you add up the money and the time I was away, it's like God was like, yeah, you did something bad, but you're gonna pay for it, and I hope you learn, from this mistake. Well, I did.
He was released in 2011. At first, Tommy had a difficult time finding a job, but then a local salon gave him a shot, and he quickly proved he had the skills to pay the bills and the character and heart of a changed man. Within a few months of his release, Tommy won a local contest for Hutchinson's favorite barber.
It just feels good to give them that fresh look and make them feel good, like show them the mirror and say, hey, how do you like that? What do you think? And you could automatically see the change in them. And then that change is like what I felt when people gave me that opportunity. It's a cleansing. It's like me giving back.
He opened Legends Barbershop in 2013.
You know, our slogan's come ordinary, leave legendary.
And Tommy says he's an open book to anyone who wants to listen.
I don't deny my past. I don't hide it. I'm very clear with it, and I speak about it.
Oh, I love it. I've known Tommy since second, third grade.
Oh, yeah.
And we're good friends, and we've both had lots of struggles and both made mistakes, and we both have bounced back and have done tremendous, and he has done a great job of changing his life around.
I can also let him know that it's not the end of the world. That look where I'm at, where I was facing 32 years in the Department of Corrections, and I got a second chance.
And Tommy passed on that second chance to his former prison mate, Luis, by giving him space in the barbershop to do tattoos. From partners in crime to partners in business, they can give you a fresh look as well as a fresh outlook on life and people and what's possible.
There's no excuse for failure. I mean, if a loser like me could do it, anyone could do it.
Check out this tattoo he inked on Army veteran Paul Morse, who, like so many in the Hutch community, has helped make all this possible through a willingness to forgive and forget in the face of accountability and humility.
Everybody deserves a chance. You can't look back and say, well, you did this and you did that, because like you said earlier, I've done some pretty bad things myself. And I don't want anybody to judge me on that, because that's not who I am anymore.
I could have easily left, went somewhere else, an entire new beginning. But I mean, if people can forgive you here, where this happened, I mean, there's no other feat you can't accomplish.
Luis hopes that someday he'll save enough money so he can start doing tattoos for free, particularly for people who want to conceal embarrassing scars and other skin anomalies. While being a tattoo artist can be a money-making venture, it can be more difficult to earn a living doing other kinds of art. That's why artist Shirley Ruffin worked as an illustrator for the CIA for many years. It was one way to make money with her talents, while in her off time, she could do the kind of art she enjoyed most. Now retired, Ruffin says she still can't discuss the top secret government work she did, but she loves to show off all her other art that fills her small Wichita apartment.
Practice, practice, practice. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall. So that's what I have done with my artwork, with my paintings. I have just practiced.
Shirley says the purpose of her art is to make people feel good. She enjoys painting cowboys and portraying the positive side of African-American life. People also get a big kick out of these stuffed dolls she makes. She calls them Blimmy dolls. They're her humorous interpretation of people.
If you don't have a sense of humor, you cannot like these dolls. And I think that everyone should be able to laugh at themselves, because most people are funny looking. Take your pick.
Now at age 79, Shirley says her art continues to get better, and she says her best work is still ahead of her. We all know Kansas has a rich history, but few realize just how far back it goes. Forget the 1800s and start thinking 80 million years ago. Not so deep in the soil rest the fossilized remains of ancient creatures that, if alive today, would make the Hollywood movies look tame. Bryan Ramsey takes us to western Kansas, where discoveries of those once ferocious animals are being made every day.
High above the prairies of western Kansas, it looks peaceful. Just outside of Scott City, the iconic Monument rocks standing tall in the setting sun. But just below the soil lies something sinister.
See all the teeth there?
Over 80 million years ago, scientists say these fields were underwater. A sea swarming with prehistoric aquatic creatures that had large teeth and a larger appetite.
because everything out here had teeth. So, you know, it was a feeding frenzy.
Today, all that's left are their fossils, and in this rural part of the state, the people who hunt for them. Barbara Shelton and her husband Chuck Bonner own the Keystone Gallery. This once abandoned turn-of-the-century church is now filled with art and fossils the couple have found.
It would be really nasty to run across one of those.
Chuck has been collecting fossils in Kansas ever since he was little. Searching for the 80-million-year-old remains became something of a family pastime.
For us to go on a picnic was to go fossil hunting.
It was basically embedded in Chuck's DNA to hunt for fossils. Barbara, not so much. The pair met in college.
I'm a political science major with a minor in economics, far flung from paleontology.
But really, I think I kind of got her involved in it. And she's been a really good, she's found some really nice fossils.
After a few outings looking for fossils, Barbara was hooked. Now they work together, running the gallery and discovering fossils, like this large mosasaur hanging on the wall.
Now, it's hard to take a picture of this because it's so long.
What I find so amazing is every fossil in this gallery wasn't only found here in northwest Kansas, but it was found within 30 miles of where this shop is located.
You know, normally I'll take a toothbrush and I'll just kind of go like that and clean it up.
Time moves slowly at the gallery.
You know what? I don't really punch into a time clock.
Each fossil on display like a piece of art, waiting 80 million years for its big reveal.
So we take our time, and that's part of the fossil deal, is taking your time.
That's a question that gets asked quite a bit, you know, how long things take. But let's put it this way, it didn't take a million years.
Chuck and Barbara have found thousands of fossils. Their discoveries are in museums across the country and have led them to be featured on a national TV show.
Hey, Chuck. Long time no see. Good seeing you. Yeah, hey, Barb.
I always wanted to keep hunting and collecting because the thrill of discovery, you know, kind of stays with you once you start finding things.
There's Spiker.
The pair do have some eclectic taste. They use a 1949 Suburban called Spiker to go hunting for fossils.
It was my dad's fossil wagon.
And their gallery is entirely powered by solar energy. In fact, they live off the grid. No power lines, no utility bills, and turns out, no stopping them either.
That point doesn't even exist when we're going to stop collecting fossils. We'll always be doing it until we can't do it anymore.
I don't really ever get bored in the fossil beds. I mean, to me, that's kind of like going home, you know.
The hills in western Kansas are changing. As time goes on, the ground continues to erode away. Still, there will be discoveries to be found, and talented people like Chuck Bonner and Barbara Shelton to preserve them.
But if you get close, you can see some shark's teeth. See the shark's teeth here? These are just good evidence of how time marches on. I mean, there's been a lot of changes from where humans have been here. And there'll be more changes afterward, too, so.
For Positively Kansas, I'm Bryan Ramsey.
In addition to hunting for fossils, Chuck is also an artist. His paintings are a biological smorgasbord of animals past and present. His artwork has been featured in various exhibits and galleries across the state. Every week, photojournalist Mike Blair amazes us with the spectacular and candid video he captures of Kansas wildlife. In this week's edition of Kansas Wild Edge, Mike shows us how he records the action of some of nature's most active and unpredictable creatures.
Top-notch film of ducks in flight is one of photography's greatest challenges. Spring finds these birds active and in their best breeding colors. Excellent pictures make colorful and breathtaking trophies that last a lifetime. But be ready, it's not easy. I've spent 40 years chasing ducks, filming them for magazines, books, and television, and the thrill never gets old. But likewise, success is never guaranteed. focus, framing, and proximity must come together for satisfying results. First, you've got to find ducks in large numbers and find a way to hide close by. Usually, you must be within 50 to 100 yards to get meaningful pictures. Use camouflage and hide in brush, or use a blind to help stay out of sight. Big lenses and bulky cameras may need tripods to help steady a moving camera. True, modern technology has compacted things and autofocus helps, but don't count on it to solve all your problems. Take video cameras, for example. Even with image stabilization that is supposed to help create clean handheld shots, 50-mile-per-hour subjects are moving too fast for smooth frames. Fluid images show duck flight without distractions, but poor technique produces a frustrating collage of jumbled motion. These clips illustrate what usually happens when hand-holding a camera. Not acceptable. But a tripod makes the difference. These images are taken with a fluid head system that smooths out the motion. Then, whether at normal speed or in slow motion, the results are satisfying. For still pictures, forget your cell phone. Close-ups require sophisticated gear, and usually tripods here as well. Focus is critical, and though autofocus can be a lifesaver, the best of these systems require expensive lenses. Manual focus may be cheaper, but it takes a practiced eye and hand. Challenge? This is it for nature outings. Brave the cold and decorate your walls with unforgettable images. I'm Mike Blair for Positively Kansas.
That's a wrap for this week. If you have a question or comment, please send us an email. The address is positivelykansas@kpts.org. You can also follow the Positively Kansas page on Facebook. Until next time, I'm Sierra Scott. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas serves more than 930,000 Kansans in various programs. Independent, member-owned. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas, an independent licensee of Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, supports KPTS.
Before investing your hard-earned money, make sure your financial advisor understands your objectives. Mark Douglas, CFP, serving our community for over 20 years, providing customized financial solutions that focus on the individual.